Welcome to today's episode of the live Shurley English Teacher Talk. I'm Kimberly Crady. I currently live in the state of Florida. I've been a national consultant and sales rep, first of all, for Shurley Instructional Materials for nearly 21 years. I was in the classroom for about 10, and I taught mainly levels 3, 4, and 5. And when I started working with Shurley English, I began teaching lessons at every grade level, kindergarten through 8th grade. I've also been a substitute teacher all the way up through 12th grade. And I'm a yoga teacher as well, so I teach adults in the evening. So I am a teacher at heart, and I came upon Shurley English, or Shurley English found me, my very first year of teaching school. I was hired 1 week before school started in a brand new state where I knew no one, in a school that I had never been into. And I walked into the 3rd grade classroom, and the co-teacher gave me this green and white book. It was a level 3. And they said, this is what you're going to teach for grammar and writing. And now I came from the state of Ohio, which was back then a whole language state. So we didn't use teacher's manuals. We had more of a scope and sequence that we had to follow, and we created the wheel every time. We used units and things like that. So to have a book that opened up and it had everything that I needed, including everything that I needed to say, and it was foreign to me. And that's what Shurley English had to offer. And look at me now. I'm gonna say good for me. So once I started teaching Shurley English, I just literally dove into the book, started from day one, followed it page by page, messed up along the way, dabbled in some things, and figured out that was working, that didn't work because I wasn't supposed to be doing that. Figured out how to make it work in my classroom with my own style of teaching. And some decades later, I became a sales rep, and then I became a national consultant. And here I am, sharing my experience with you, and my love for Shurley English, and my love for children learning our language. And I have to tell you, I was not an expert in grammar. I'm a physical fitness buff. And so that was my thing. Grammar and writing became more of my thing once I started teaching Shurley English, because I was open to learning right beside my students. And that really, truly, to me, is one of the greatest gifts that Shurley English has offered me as an adult, as a teacher, so that I can share, and I can actually now express my thoughts and ideas much better and communicate much better than what I did when I first started teaching. So that's kind of my background with Shurley English. And I've been around the United States, been around the world, and I will tell you, I know this firsthand. Shurley English is in countries around the world. So it is a gift that you have in your hands if you do have it. So hold on to it tight, learn as much as you can, and enjoy the rest of our episode. I'm going to hand it over to David and let him give you a little synopsis of his background.
Well, we'll check our audio and see if we're still getting the echo. And I assume you are.
Better.
It is better. Okay, well, we'll go with that. Now, I'm still hearing the echo, so this is actually what I always hear in my regular head anyway, so that's fine. Well, thank you, Kimberly. I appreciate knowing your background. I already knew your background. But for me, knowing English the way that I did back when I was in elementary and junior high school, I had fabulous teachers. And what was amazing to me is around the age of, well, it'd be about 10 or 11, it'd be about 5th grade, I started to notice that I had a propensity for words and language and English. And I didn't know why I could understand it, but I think I had that particular kind of brain. That was a great discovery. What I didn't understand at the time is not everybody gets that. And when I hit junior high and we did the traditional grammar lessons where I think you've talked about this before, Kimberly, that you'd have a lot of sentences, and if you were studying nouns, you had to read the sentence and underline each noun, and there might be 10 sentences, and if you were lucky, every other one had an answer in the back of the book. I never had to consult that because I was really, really good at grammar. At least I thought I was. And I'm not bragging. I'm not. My point is, I had that kind of brain, and I learned it the hard way. And I remember one of the very first things that kind of helped me understand grammar and the parts of speech was, first of all, my junior high teacher, Mrs. Virginia Johnson. And I remember thinking, this woman is going to kill me. I'm never going to get this stuff. But she taught sentence diagramming. And this was the old school way. And I know Kimberly and I talked a little bit about where should this conversation go. And we sort of have come to the idea that there is an old school way of thinking about how you learn the parts of speech, and then there's the new way, and that's the Shurley way that we're going to get into a little bit as we talk about the question and answer flow. But before we get into a lot of that, let's get some background here. First of all, for all of you out there who can hear, and Kimberly, let me know if the echo is getting too hard.
It's come back a little bit, yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe I can throw it back to you again while we're still working on this. But what I'd like to do is go ahead and go to one of our slides that we were talking about earlier. And we don't normally do visuals, but we thought in this case, it might help. And as you're getting set up for that, let's think about how you learned grammar in the first place. And I don't know what your teacher said about why it was important. Probably didn't talk about that. It was just a part of the curriculum. Nowadays, I really don't know that it's prevalent in a lot of the reading series that a lot of us are using in classrooms. It is very important, however, to recognize that the way it used to be taught probably isn't being taught that same way very much anymore in a lot of the curricula available. And so I'm going to let Kimberly kind of launch us into a little bit of background about how Shurley English approaches it.
The second pillar of instruction is what Shurley English calls the question and answer flow, the Q&A flow for short. Okay, so take a look at this foundation for writing. If we can teach students about words and what they mean and their role that they play in a sentence, then we can start to teach students how to manipulate those words in a sentence to create more creative, diverse, descriptive, and lively sentences. And if we can teach them how to create those sentences and understand truly why they created and they made a conscious choice in choosing the words that they use, then we can teach them to put those sentences in a logical progression of ideas, which then will ultimately result in a paragraph or essays. But it all begins with the first pillar and then moving on to the second pillar. So as you can see, what we do with this question and answer flow, and like David mentioned earlier, this is a new school. All right, there's old school and new school. I learned from the old school way of diagramming sentences, but I didn't learn it until I was in 7th grade. Now, I learned grammar, but not in a way like Shurley teaches it. So I understood it, but I didn't understand how it actually connected to writing. So Shurley English gives students the opportunity and enough practice and the skills to truly make that grammar writing connection. So what students learn about a noun is that it's a naming word. It names people, places, things, and sometimes ideas. They learn that the verbs show action or a state of being. So as you can see here, in one lesson, we will begin to teach the subject, noun, and verb. In the next lesson, As you heard me recite the adverb jingle, we'll always begin teaching with a jingle and then getting into the question and answer flow. They learn how to add adverbs that tell how, when, and where. In the next lesson, then they will learn to add adjectives that tell what kind, which one, how many, just as you see here. Then we'll continue adding article adjectives like a, and the. And then finally, even in first grade, your first graders will be learning how to recognize and how to orally classify prepositional phrases. So they learn about prepositions, they learn about the object of the preposition, and where it can be placed in a sentence. All 8 parts of speech in Shurley English are taught in grades 1 through 8. So this becomes the foundation for writing. This also, what it does with the jingle, and also what you're seeing here, is this gives the students an opportunity, and you as a teacher, to start using domain-specific language. Just like the mathematics or geometry teacher will use specific terminology for geometry, algebra, trigonometry, all of the different variants of mathematics. English is the same way. We have specific words that we use, specific vocabulary, and so what you're ultimately doing by helping your students understand this is helping them to own their language. All right, so now you're going to be able to start to use the parts of speech and speak to them using domain-specific language.
I like that, what you had said about domain-specific language, Kimberly. It's funny because we don't, as teachers, we don't normally talk about that. It's really kind of the teacher ease that we do. We don't always want kids necessarily to know what we're up to, but we love it in Shurley English because you sneak it in there because of the jingles. You sneak it in there because of the question and answer flow. Well, what was important when I first began teaching Shurley English after the jingles, there had to be a place where there was a point of application. And I knew that was the question and answer flow. I wasn't sure that first and second graders would be able to manage it. And in about 4 weeks' time, I was blown away that they could actually start to understand not just the parts of speech that I'd been teaching them in the jingles, but the questions in the jingles started making a lot of sense to them. And their brains began to connect to, well, let's just back it up for a moment. Brains are always looking for answers to information. Information that comes in, they have a question about it. The brain wants to know an answer. It will do everything to find that information and lock it in, because even kids want a logical response. And what I loved about the question and answer flow that wasn't like the old sentence diagramming model we used. When they asked about what a noun was going to be, who or what was such basic question words. And my first and second graders could always figure out what the subject of the sentence was. And it took about 3 or 4 weeks for that to really kick in. And then one of the things I loved doing was talking about the verb, the heart of the sentence. And what I wanted my kids to understand is that without the verb, there really isn't any real comprehension in a sentence. It won't make any sense. Same is true if there's no subject. And ta-da, even at the earliest ages of instruction, my students were understanding what a real sentence was versus a fragment. I can't tell you why that matters. Because, well, I know I can tell you why that matters, which is why I do this kind of stuff. When I was working with 4th graders, what I discovered probably the second or third day of school, because I was into this idea of get the kids writing. And we're going to hit the ground running. I gave them their pencils, their papers, the journals, and they were supposed to start writing whatever was on their heart and mind. I couldn't understand what was on their heart and mind because most of their sentences didn't make sense. And they weren't writing complete sentences, and they didn't know that they were or that they weren't. And that's what, when that was before I understood Shurley English was out there. And I knew what I knew from back in my day, and try as I might, I couldn't figure out what am I going to do because the the curriculum that I was using, we did teach nouns and we did teach verbs. And let's see, by chapter 6, I think we might have been on adverbs. And it just continued with one part of speech at a time. And I did not recognize that unless you teach a part of speech within the context of the other parts of speech, it's not going to help the kids learn the grammar. And so, Kimberly, I don't know if that experience is similar to yours, but when you first started teaching writing, and we talked about this even in the first pillar of instruction with the jingles, what did you discover about your student writers?
First of all, the writers were all over the place. It was like, and I can say that from experience with my own writing. I don't, of course, I had great teachers too. Mrs. Fugate was my 7th grade grammar teacher, but I can't say I was confident in my writing, even though I knew the parts of speech. Learning the parts of speech in context, the way I learned it through Shurley English as a teacher, and what I saw from my students is that I was kind of comparing them to how I was taught. And it was very different. It was much, much easier for my students to grab onto it. And I will say this, what I learned from teaching different grade levels is that some of the grade levels, it was about exposure, and other grade levels, it became more about the more practice they had, you saw them begin to master. And so it was the process of it that I quickly saw. I was like, they want more. They're ready for more. And so if I taught it the way I had been teaching it or had been taught it, meaning teaching in isolation, how many of you, just consider the question, how many of you will take a week or more to teach nouns? And then the next part of speech that you teach is probably going to be the verb.
You mean like in a unit?
Verbs. Yes.
Right.
And that's how a lot of language arts curricula will instruct it. They teach in isolation. But when you can spiral these, and notice this kind of pyramid, you see the subject noun stays consistent throughout numbers 1 through 6. And then all we're doing is adding a new part of speech. You see the spiraling happen. So once in the day 1, they're worried and they're concerned about subject, noun, and verb. But by the time they get to day 2, day 3, day 4, they have practiced subject, noun, and verb again and again and again, and then they practice adverb again and again. And while they're learning their adjectives, article adjectives, then it's amazing to watch the learning take place and the brain actually work and process the information. I think this is the only curriculum I've been able to actually see it in action. Like Bloom's taxonomy in action, higher order thinking skills in action. And then as they learn like this, my students were able to actually think about the sentences, think more clearly and with more intention. They were more intentional about what the sentences that they wrote.
That's excellent. Thank you for adding that in. I do have some questions that I want to try to see if we can get this out and maybe a possible answer. So we have a 5th grade teacher, and of course, nouns are covered and the variants, verbs for the variants. That happens over time. She's able to review often, and it says that the reading curriculum works well with Shurley grammar in complementary ways. Thank you for bringing that up about Shurley grammar. I think, Kimberly, you talked about this in our first talk. Shurley English is what we would call the core curriculum, and then we also have something called Shurley Grammar, and I believe that's what this teacher is referring to. And let's see, I think that's from Barbara, and thank you, Barbara, for that. And I'm going to see if there's more information here because it looks like there is. Let's see. I had a comment from, I believe it was Annette, and she teaches second grade. And she said, some kids love Shirley, some kids hate it. But once they begin to understand grammar concepts, the writing is always better, even for those who don't like Shirley. And so, Annette, my question would be, and I appreciate the comment, you know, the way children approach anything, and the way the teacher approaches it often dictates, you know, a certain level of success or sometimes not a level of success. And so what do you think about the way it's taught that caused your students to actually improve? Think about that for a moment and maybe pipe in. I think she already said, learning the parts of speech helps students improve sentence building with stronger writing skills and the ability to express themselves articulately. Yep, Annette, you should be on this with us so that we can all talk together about this. That's right. I think that's a very good point. Let's see.
Can I pipe in? Do you mind if I pipe in?
No, go ahead.
So I was just thinking, Shurley English is a different methodology. And so when you ask students to and present to them a new way of learning, sometimes they can be resistant. Even teachers can be resistant when you start to change things. I know training teachers around the United States, some of us like the way things have always been done and we don't like to change things. Well, get this. Most teachers will teach subject or teach nouns, then teach verbs, then teach adjectives, and then teach adverbs, because notoriously I've heard this. Adverbs are always harder for students to learn. Is that true? Or have you tried actually teaching the adverb first? And why does Shurley English teach the adverb before the adjective? We teach the adverb second or third. So if you look at number 2, boys sat quietly. We're going to teach that adverbs modify verbs, adjectives, or another adverb. An adverb asks how, when, where. To find an adverb, go, ask, get. Where do I go? To a verb, adjective, or another adverb. So we're teaching the adverb third because we're teaching that it modifies or describes the verb. Then we're going to go back. Look at number 3. Little boys sat quietly. Then we'll go and teach the adjective. So here's how Shurley works. We identify the subject, noun, and verb. Look at number 1. Subject, noun, and verb. We call that the core parts first. Then we work our way to the end of the sentence. Okay, once we reach the end of the sentence, follow me through to number 2. Now look at number 3. We worked on the core. We found the core, subject, noun, and verb, boys sat. Then we worked our way to the adverb, the end of the sentence. Once you hit the end of the sentence, go back to the subject, noun, and pick up all the other parts of speech from the subject, noun to the beginning of the sentence. That's the order of operations that Shurley works in. That's the only reason why we're teaching adverbs before adjectives. It's nothing major, but it's done and the students most of the students don't know any different. So adverbs aren't necessarily harder, especially when you have the jingle to fall back on. You can also create posters that have the 3 different questions for adjectives and adverbs and create lists, a working word wall, if you will. There's all kinds of little added things that you could do. Use your creativity if you're running into those issues. But the reason I brought this up was because some students don't like Shurley, some students do like Shurley. Some teachers do, some teachers don't. It's all in the way that you deliver it. So just know that your students and recognize that they all don't have the same brains. Like David had mentioned before, his brain and my brain are very different, but similar in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
And you may find some gifted children approach and look at Shurley a little differently, or above average students, than, say, for instance, a child on the spectrum, or a more musically inclined child, or a child with ADHD, okay, and attention issues. They may enjoy this because their brain is constantly active here. So just remember who your audience is, and know that they are all different. And the way you approach it and deliver it, be thinking of all of the different brains here, and how you approach and deliver the information and this new methodology.
Thank you, Kimberly. I wanted to tell you that Barbara also wrote back in and said that learning the reasons behind the why of the skills often gives the students motivation to remember it. And I couldn't agree more. One of the things that blew me away is that once my students really understood the order of the questions and the answers in the question and answer flow, they hardly ever missed a beat. But and there was a question about this. It was this. My kids do a great job classifying Shirley's sentences. Let's see, where does it go? Right. When they were doing it orally, the teacher was expressing concern that she couldn't keep track of who was actually doing it right and understanding it and who wasn't. Now, Kimberly, can you talk about that? Because one of the natures of what we do in the Q&A flow is that it's done like the old lab schools from the 1800s. Every kid stands up, every kid says something together with every other kid. Can you explain why that is either good or bad, and how a teacher can keep track?
Yeah, I want to backtrack before we answer that question, because we may have some callers that don't know what the question and answer flow is, what it looks like, what it sounds like, and you started talking about like the old school. So let's go through and let's take this sentence, for example. The parents gave their children some presents, right? So old school versus new school diagramming. Old school was called parsing words. Now, most of us didn't know what that meant. I never heard of parsing, but maybe my teacher called it diagramming. So, per Merriam-Webster, parsing words is breaking down a sentence into its grammatical components to understand its structure and meaning. And this is what it looked like. Do you remember that?
I like
salivating. Are you drooling, David?
It's like, ooh, I do get this.
I remember doing this, but I couldn't tell you right now. I couldn't walk you through this. It didn't sink. I didn't comprehend it. So new school becomes the question and answer flow. I say it's the diagramming 2.0. It's a systematic way of orally analyzing the role that each word plays in a sentence. And this is from Shurley English. So we showed you that on the previous slides with that little pyramid. David, would you go through and recite the question and answer flow for this sentence?
Yes. The parents gave their children some presents. Who gave their children some presents? Sorry. Parents, subject, noun. What is being said about parents? Parents gave, verb. Parents gave what? Now, before I continue, gave what? What did they give? Presents. Verify the noun. Does presents mean the same thing as parents? No. Direct object. Gave, verb transitive. Now, parents gave presents to whom? What makes sense? Children. This is the indirect object. Okay, I have to stop, Kimberly. I want to keep going the way we normally do it, but I've just got to say, I had to memorize those definitions verbatim in seventh grade, just like you and everybody else did, probably. I still have that definition rolling in my head. It never made as much sense as this does right here because the questions in the question answer flow forced the brain to go, oh, parents gave presents to the children. Hey, kids, that's the indirect object. It is the thing or the person that is getting the thing that was acted upon. All this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, what kind of parents? Or I'm sorry, what kind of presents? Some adjective. Okay, and now I have to go back one more place, and I have to say whose children? Whose children? Their
There.
possessive pronoun adjective. Oh wow. What? I never even learned that back in the day because here we have dual action happening with that word. Okay, and then we have the article adjective. And so, Kimberly, when you were talking about the jingles earlier,
Mhm.
when all of this started coming together in my head, it was so cool because I already knew it, but I never understood it the way that I was able to impart it to my kids. And they got this so simply. If you look above at the old school way, it is the same thing. Because when you learn to diagram sentences the old way, if you have a noun, we know that according to even our jingles, adjectives are used to modify nouns or pronouns. So if you look under parents, the is an article adjective, so it has to be on the slanted line below. Then if you go over to presence, look at that, that's the direct object. Some is an adjective because it tells how much or how many. That means it answers an adjective question based on the question and answer flow, and it has to be on a slanted line under that noun. And then look at their children. Whose children? Their possessive pronoun adjective. Now, here's where the new school thought is so much more helpful to kids because of the labels that we use. When you say whose, we're automatically going into possession. And when I try to teach kids about possessive nouns. Ah, it is really not the easiest thing to do simply because I was trying to take that information from a text. This was so much easier when I just used the question whose, right? If I talk to you, Kimberly, whose poster is that back on the wall? It's yours. It
Right.
the logic of the question and answer flow did so many amazing things. And probably the most important thing is it kept the sentence intact. If you look at the old school way and like cover up the colored sentence, that for spatially, I'll say spatially disoriented kids, we would lose them. That just doesn't make sense. But for almost all learners, if you keep the sentence intact, you don't lose comprehension. You still have every word in its proper place in a sentence. And that's another important point to remember about the Q&A flow. It forces kids to recognize that the position of a word makes all the difference. Because not every word is always going to be in a particular classification of a part of speech. Now, I would like for Kimberly maybe think about that for just a minute. Did you ever teach a curriculum where, like during the noun unit, what did they list in the noun unit? A bunch of nouns.
Mm-hmm.
But Kimberly, what happens if they threw the noun basketball in the list? And then you end up with a basketball player being talked about in a sentence. And then you
They
ask a
still called
child,
it a noun.
of course they did. So for me, when I saw I'll just call it the integration of both the old and the new when I started teaching Shurley English, I didn't have to be convinced very much that this is the only way that I can really get kids to understand the way I understood it. And I think really that's not a bad goal. Teachers, if you know something and you have to be able to impart it to kids, the greatest compliment is that they could teach it back to you, right? Or they could
Hmm.
teach to a peer. With this program, I learned that I could get even second graders who would help very reluctant first graders. They were literally teaching them grammar because after about 7 or 8 weeks in this program, the second graders that I was teaching, they became experts. They understood why words work the way they do in a sentence. Kimberly, you want to check to see if anybody else has any comments or questions?
Sure, it'll require that I stop sharing my screen.
Okay.
Let me go back. A couple of things I want to say about that when we go back. Hi, everybody. I'm back. All righty. Let's see. We heard from Barbara. We heard from Annette. And and there's a Johnny Holcomb in
Illustrious Texas
there.
representative. Let's see. What
Yeah, if
Johnny
any of you
said
are
was,
from Texas, our Texas rep is on, Johnny Holcomb. He can help you. Oh, here's a new question. Benjamin, how should we grade the journal entries, and can we grade workbook pages as whole instead of sections? By all means, you can grade the whole shebang, or you can grade by section. Grading the journal entries, David, do you have, do you want to touch on that?
yeah, this is just my personal opinion because I've tried it lots of different ways. A lot of it may depend on the grade level, the age of your kids. But what I thought journal writing really meant most for my kids is that I was reading them. We kept them very private. They were allowed to share them if they wanted to in the classroom. I had a system of finding out if they wanted them to be shared or not. I also had a system for whether they wanted me to read an entry or not. And I told them to do something special in their journal so that I would know to read it or not read it. I didn't grade it. I simply read what they wrote, and then I would echo back using what I would consider more correct grammar and English in a very subtle way. I would try to respond in handwritten notes in their journal to try to, either respond to questions they asked or give them some insight. Sometimes if it was an entry about, let's just say, a book that I had read aloud, or maybe a book that they had been reading in a lit set of some kind, or a group reading. And then I would make sure that I echoed proper grammar in my response, but I would try to answer their questions and not give points. They did get a point for did or didn't do it.
Right, right. I'll add to that. I never graded my journals. I did the same thing that you did. I would read them and provide my own handwritten response. And I will tell you this, I didn't like writing when I first noticed I didn't like writing in sixth grade. And I wrote a blog about this, and we have a blog section. And if you want to look at it, it's on journal writing. My teacher, my sixth grade teacher, Mrs. Marty Riddle, she had us write in our journals every time we got back from recess, lunch recess. So it calmed us down. It got us more focused. And journal writing was more than just busy work. But we all thought it was busy work, right? But I know because I know she's a smart woman and she was a well-rounded teacher. She had a bigger purpose to why she had journal writing in her daily schedule, because she didn't grade it either, and she got to know us, and that's how she built the rapport with her students. We opened up about all kinds of things to Mrs. Riddle, and it showed me that Mrs. Riddle was interested in me and what was going on in my life. And I didn't want that graded. And I'm sure she didn't want to grade it either. It was a form of communication. And in the bigger picture, that's what Shurley English is. We're teaching communication, and it's your duty as a teacher. That's what we signed up for, is to give our students the knowledge, the skills, and practice to become the most competent and confident communicators that we can be. So if you do choose to grade a journal, maybe you have something overlying, a request that, all right, I'd like you to highlight all of your adjectives that you use, and let's count up how many adjectives you use, instead of saying, instead of having a rubric that you've created that will actually assess a journal entry. If you're using Shurley English, not Shurley Grammar, that's a separate product. If you are using the core curriculum called Shurley English, you have plenty of opportunities to take grades on their writing that you shouldn't need to take a grade on the journal writing.
Yeah.
What the journal writing will also do in conjunction with the jingles, the first pillar, the second pillar, and we're going to get to writing in the third pillar in our next session, it gets your students 100% engaged. 100% engaged. And it doesn't matter. I've had a child on the spectrum engaged. I've had ADHD children bouncing on the balls, putting, chewing on their shirts. And then when it came time to recite the question and answer flow, shirts out of the mouth, and they are up, they are focused. They're even up as a 4th grade, 5th grader, up leading the question and answer flow.
Yes.
So I think it's important to the engagement piece when we start slapping, and you do what you want, but I think building that rapport with your students is huge. It was for me, because once you can earn that trust, you've created an environment in your classroom, and I know, David, you always ask me to talk about this. Your students will take risks if they feel safe in your classroom. If you create an environment where it's okay to mess up, it's okay to use your words, it's okay to express, you've got to give them permission to express. You've got to do that too, because they're watching you. You are the model. They're watching how you write, listening to how you speak, watching how you act even, because you know this. You're with them more during the day than they're with their parents or grandparents or whoever their guardians are.
Yeah. Kimberly, we're getting close to our shutting down time, but before we do that, I do want to go back and just address, I believe it was Benjamin had asked about the grading of the workbooks and that it's chunked up. And then I also had a comment that when you use the portal, that some of those are chunked up. And so this teacher, what she does is she will sometimes grade those if students need extra practice on certain skills. So I take that to mean that again, you can play around with it. You can modify how you are evaluating the work that they're doing. Kimberly and I both could not say anything other than, yes, there is a lot to grade and a lot to evaluate when you teach a program like this. But I hope all of you would agree, it's worth the effort. You're in the trenches when you teach this kind of program, because you really do get to know your kids very, very well. And you also get to find out how well they are communicating in lots of ways, spoken and written, of course. I do think that evaluation absolutely is essential, but maybe let's think of it in terms of, it's more like a life journal of how they're developing through a year. And I'm a big fan of anecdotal records. I think that coupling that with the work you're doing in the workbooks, and whether you're chunking it or doing individual pages, you can tell by looking at that information, and you're looking at it frequently when you do anecdotal records, you'll know how the student is developing, how the progress is coming, whether it's fast or slow. You can see where there's a repeated error again and again and again. Well, that's an ideal place to go back and maybe take a closer look at those pages, Make sure that your teaching is up to snuff, that you're following the script, and then make sure that you're giving them adequate practice. If you're doing the book, cover to cover, they'll get adequate practice, but you'll never finish the book because there's a lot of information. The nice thing about that is in Shurley English, with the question and answer flow, let's get back to that for just a minute. You teach that so early and so often that there are times when you might have to maybe skip out of certain lessons that already repeat everything your kids have already mastered because you know that they mastered it. And that way you can go spend more time on the things that need some shoring up. Also, there was somebody else.
David, I have 3 points, and I'm going to cover Annette's question in my one of my points.
Okay, that's where I was going next because there was a question. All right, go ahead. Thank you, Kimberly.
Okay. First and foremost, first point, when you are engaged in the question and answer flow, and we've heard this several times, well, I don't see it really transfer into writing because I'm saying the questions and my students are just giving me the answers. Halt.
Stop.
If that is happening in your classroom, you must stop. Rein them back in. Start over where you're at. And if you've already started it and you've already started it that way, it's okay. Just be like, you know what, guys and gals, boys and girls, we're going to try something new today. Now, we're all going to ask the questions and we're all going to answer the questions because we don't need you doing any more work. This is where they get to be held accountable for learning what they've, or applying what they've learned in the jingles to the question and answer flow. And then in the next feature, practice and improve sentences or revise sentences and or sentence blueprint, then they're going to take the reverse approach to the Q&A flow and start writing. So it's imperative that you and your students ask and answer all of the questions together. That's where you're getting 100% engagement. With that, we talked about, somebody else had brought up the question of how do I know if my students are getting it orally? Here's what I did. I loved having all 25, 26 stinky fifth graders right around that piping hot transparency, overhead transparency, right after lunch. One, I always taught Shurley English after lunch because it's very active. They have a tendency to drift down because they've just had lunch and they're tired from recess. So I got them active and moving around, jump up and down when they're singing the jingles, moving around. During the question and answer flow, they get up out of their seats, they come to me because then I can hear every single one of them. If I've got a troublemaker in the room, I put that person right next to me. I've got my ADHD child over here standing up, leading the question and answer flow to keep that one engaged, while I am also managing and monitoring who's just saying, watermelon, okay? Or I'll say, all right, everybody with blue eyes, you're up. You get to do sentence number 2. Everybody with brown eyes, everybody's wearing sandals. Divvy it up like that. You'll know if you have a chatty Cathy or a jabbering Johnny, maybe. I don't know. You ask them to turn their volume down. Use nonverbal cues. So you'll see me even in a teacher training. I'll say, I'll push my hand back or I'll go push it, take it down a little, but I need more from you. More from this side of the room. So I'm using nonverbal cues and they're rolling with it. That's how I orally assess my students during the Q&A flow to know. The other way is sometimes, and I've written a blog about this as well, I created centers at the end of a chapter, or if I was in the middle somewhere, if I needed to work on something more specifically. And I had a Q&A flow center that I would be leading, and they'd have used the vis-a-vis and they'd write on it while they were speaking it, and I could hear right away who needed a little more practice and who didn't. Okay. Now, Annette, her question is about how can she get through each chapter. It takes a long time. Sometimes there are 10, 11 lessons per chapter. Here's the ideal, depending on your grade level. try and get one lesson per day. That means fire drill is going to happen no matter where you teach. Fire drill happens in the middle of Shurley English. You stop right there. You have to go outside. You come back, bam, it's time for mathematics. So you close your Shurley English book, and then you start right there tomorrow. You pick up from where you left off, and you go lesson by lesson. You do your best to get one lesson done per day. If you are first, second, David, you could probably speak to this a little bit more. You were a second grade teacher, but 20-ish minutes, 25, if they're really engaged, maybe push it. Third to fourth, 30, 35, 40, fifth, sixth. You've got a block. You've got maybe an hour, but you've got to squeeze writing in there too. Please remember that this is the foundation for writing. You can't just teach writing and expect the grammar to come in. You've got to teach grammar. You've got to invest the time, like David is saying, into laying this foundation. Then writing will become easier for you to read, for you to grade, for them to complete the writing process. So 7th and 8th, you guys have blocks as well. Maybe you divide the block up. And make sure it's done daily. Even if you have to pull the jingles out and teach jingles during transition times, in between lining up for classes. I've had all 125 fifth graders outside lining up for recess. What are they doing? I get them together by singing and jingles. They all know the jingles if they're using Shurley English in the 5th grade. So bam, I get them quiet, and they're still actually I'm planting more seeds. And
absolutely.
They're reviewing.
And I would say, Kimberly, that's even more effective because the brain will soak in more knowledge by being active. There's blood flowing, there's oxygen pouring through their bodies that way. Our brains really like that, and kids' brains especially. The other thing, to piggyback onto what you just said, when you are trying to play around with your schedule and you have this bulk of curriculum, and it's not just Shurley English that you're teaching, the beautiful thing about Shurley is that because of this constant spiraling and repetition, you're going to hit it hard and daily. Every time you walk in that classroom, you're going to have a lesson, whether it's a lesson a day or maybe you have to split it into 2 days, that's fine. It's okay to give all of the first part of the instruction, especially at the beginning of the year, such meticulous attention, because later you'll be able to pull back from some of that. It's so repetitive. You never teach anything in Shurley English that isn't building upon something that's already been taught in Shurley English. So every time you do the final exercises of what you're doing, you're still practicing all the basic ones you always had. Now, our time is up, and I would talk about this all day long because I love this.
Yeah.
But I do want to end with something that one of our listeners sent in, and I think it was Barbara. Thank you. I thought that's so well worded and such a wonderful way to close this off. She said, Shurley is like a secret code for writing and learning. The structure of the lessons builds off one another. It builds off the foundation or the base of a sentence with methods to make it more interesting. You're hired.
I love that.
I do too.
I love that.
Listen, everyone, thank you for taking time to listen to our conversation and participating. Nothing gets me more excited. I'm sure, Kimberly, you feel the same way. When you are actually engaged, it's the same thing that happens when we're in front of our kids. You know you're winning, and it's such an exciting experience. So we want you to remember to go to www.shurley.com and check out all of our resources. We also want you to plan to come to our next talk, which will be about the 3rd pillar of instruction in Shurley English, called, Kimberly? The blueprint sentences.
Oh,
gotcha.
Which is writing.
Yeah, it's going to be the foundation for writing, and I don't think you're going to miss it, because if you heard this one, this builds right on into our blueprint sentences. And with that, we say have a great afternoon.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care.